Welcome to the Flower Essence Podcast, and join us on an exploration of the healing wisdom of flowers.
With combined decades of experience in the study and practice of flower essence therapy, I, Kathleen Aspens, and co-host Rokana Feld guide you to reconnect to nature with these potent vibrational remedies. Hi everyone, welcome to the Flower Essence Podcast again. I am really delighted because today is an interview show with one of my favorite people, Ruth Toledo Altschuler. Ro and I will be interviewing her on a topic that is very dear to her heart, the inner marriage, and how flower essence therapy can help with that. So I'll start by just introducing Ruth. If you don't know her, you should. Her practice focuses on the soul journey, and she guides her clients through initiations, challenges, thresholds, and transformations. She's a flower essence therapy practitioner certified by the Flower Essence Society and has 3 decades of experience in the field as an entrepreneur, educator, and mentor. In Brazil, she founded a flower essence education and distribution company offering in-depth courses that, over decades, built the foundations of flower essence therapy as a modality with high credibility and public demand. She now lives in the United States and combines her ease with technology, her skills as a photographer and designer with her deep connection to the healing archetypes of plants and flowers. Her offerings include online consultations, courses, and mentoring for English and Portuguese speakers around the world. Thank you so much for being with us, Ruth.
Oh, it is my joy. And thank you so much for this initiative.
Well, we are really enjoying sharing the words, the messages of the flower essences with the world in this format, and we're really just delighted to have you here. You're one of my mentors, and I'm just so appreciative for everything I've learned from you, and just delighted that you're here.
Yeah, and it's great to talk to you again, Ruth. We've had some really wonderful conversations in the past, so I'm very excited to get started on this one with you.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to your questions.
So you have so many offerings and experience, but I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what brings people to your practice.
Yeah, that is such an interesting point and something that I really watch carefully. And right now, I am watching this phenomena that has happened again and again of people coming to me with very specific topics and issues that are so directly related to what I have been studying in a deep way. Also, deeply related to my own personal healing journey and what has brought me into this work. And so, wherever I am somewhat more advanced on my own healing journey, having already embodied certain things that I've learned because of the healing that I needed myself, I am at a point that I know some more about this and that I have conquered some of the steps, and then clients come needing those steps that I have been walking for a long time myself. And for me, one of the topics that's been very present in my practice has to do with deep healing of the wounded child within and deep healing of patterns of relationship. And so that's been a recurrent theme that my clients bring, and that I've been going deeper and deeper and doing the inner work with them.
The inner child work is essential. There's so many wounded children running around in the world wearing adult clothes. It's one of the best things that flower essences can do, isn't it? That it can work with those wounds that no one else can see and very little else can really touch, and the essences can absolutely hold that child part and heal that child part with you.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I'm really fascinated with is how different areas of research are now beginning to meet. And so I'm seeing, for instance, the new versions of the very rich research on attachment patterns, attachment modes, and attachment wounds, and how that is being combined also with somatic therapy approaches and the understanding of the whole neurophysiology of trauma, and how our work with the essences can meet this knowledge and this awareness to take this work to very deep levels of transformational power.
That sounds wonderful. Can you talk a little bit more about how you incorporate the flower essences into that work?
Yeah, and so one of the things that I have found with my own process and my own studies and my own research and application of the use of the essences is that there are levels of change that can only happen when you are able to bring a sense, a felt sense of what that change is like. And when you're able to embody the feelings of that changed state. However, just to feel it for a moment, which is what you can when you have like a beautiful guided journey and an experience, is good because you get the feeling of that change. But to actually install that, as Rick Hansen uses the word transforming a state, taking it to a level of becoming a trait, you actually need to bring in a new habit. You actually need to almost go through a training of the process. And the flower essences, let's think, for instance, of that tremendous feeling of abandonment, of feeling unlovable, of lack of love that so many inner children carry deep within. When we have that within us, how can we really access that place and bring that love into these recesses within us? So there are some ways that involve guided journeys, guided meditation, inner parenting, being really gentle and loving with the child part within you. And when you also bring the flower essences to this journey, that takes it to a whole other level of embodiment of these feelings and of these states. And the fact that we use the essences rhythmically, repetitively, like every day, we're actually focusing on that feeling and we're bringing the actual information of that plant into our system. That brings an added layer of power and depth that allows for effective transformation that really gets embodied.
I really resonate with that a lot. I love what you said about embodying the feelings of the changed state as well, and how the flower essences help us do that and give us that constant reminder when we use them with repetition.
Yeah, and the flower essences also, that's one of the things that I find in my practice, that they are an amazing path for perceiving the patterns that we hold inside with more clarity. So I was going to say I was going to use the word diagnosis, but I don't think that word says enough about the understanding of the patterns and the systems involved and the archetypal workings that are at play. And the flower essences, as an oracle tool, let's say, they are amazing in terms of how precisely they're able to inform us about the specificity of the patterns that the person holds.
Perhaps we can ground that into a specific archetype. Is there a particular flower that you're thinking of? So it'll help us to really see that as a smaller picture into a larger picture, this holographic information that the flowers bring to us that talks to that entire archetype.
Yeah. And let's think, for example, that we have an issue with the inner child that is related to a sense of lack of warmth. And that issue actually becomes correlated with a fear of being seen for who you really are, because there is a sense that if people find out who you really are, they're not going to love you. And so then there is this need to create some kind of persona that's always very nice to people and that's always saying yes to everything. And so when we understand through the essences that show up in our reading that that person needs the Mariposa lily for those deep feelings of not having received the love that they needed. And yet there's also this pattern of always being very nice. And then on another level, another essence informs us that there are areas of held in anger that couldn't be expressed because that would bring in the situations of not being loved. So that shows us another piece of the pattern. So now we have the feelings of abandonment, the needing to be the nice people pleaser person, and needing to hold in the feelings of anger, and yet they're there. And piece by piece, you begin to see the survival strategy patterns all there revealed to us by the conversation with the client and the essences that showed up. And when we treat them together, that really helps us to treat the overall pattern of survival that the person has developed throughout their lives, bringing in the balance, bringing in the other possibilities, bringing in the healing, bringing in the transformation and change. But that also happens based on the possibility of the system healing itself from its own inner intelligence. And that's one of the things that the flower essences do in such a beautiful way, because they help awaken the inner wisdom, the inner intelligence that knows what the healthy mode of operating can be.
And I like that the way that you work, it's really focusing on this longer trajectory. It's not focusing on today, it's focusing over the seasons and the months. And as this healing process takes place, it's not trying to make it happen instantaneously. It's a very organic process that comes through extended and conscious work with the flowers.
I love that you bring this up, because yes, that's one of the things we learn so much working with the flowers. And if we use our essence reading as a source of information, it really shows us the timing of what is possible at each step. And it's so precise. And there's only so much that we can take in and transform at each step of the way. But the flower essence reading has an amazing way of showing that to us with so much precision. And it's so, there's so many revelations. We're always in awe, and so it's almost like it emerges and it shows, okay, now I'm ready to release one more layer of that pain that I've been holding in. It's ready to emerge and be transformed. It's ready to be embraced. Oh, that is beautiful. Let's do it. And then there's the encouragement and the inspiration as to how this is going to be done.
Your work is so beautiful in that it does have this ability to sort of show a snapshot or an image of what is happening now, but also with the time release of where you're going and what you'll become. It reminds me a little bit of reading, I think it was reading the Overstory, a book recently that talked. One of the trajectories in the book was this family who had taken photographs every year of this chestnut tree, and over this 100-year period, they had these images of this tree as it grew. And I kind of see our own stories a little bit that way too, where we can see it doesn't happen overnight and nothing happens suddenly, but it's this organic process of growth and flowering and blooming of your soul. And I think that your work is really nurturing that.
Yeah, I love that you say that, and you say it also from having watched its workings in its living process. And I think what's beautiful is that today we're having a conversation about the perspective and possibility of this long-term therapy process, the depth that it entails, and the beauty of the transformation.
How long do you typically work with clients in this process?
Well, what I love about the privilege of the work that I've been called to do, or that I've been chosen to do by the essences, I usually say that the flowers have chosen me, is that I've had the privilege of working with people not too often. So we meet kind of every 3 months or so, or sometimes twice a year, but over a period of several years, sometimes many, many years. And that is absolutely fascinating, because that's when we can see the journey, the growth, the richness, and the evolving process that each one has taken. And we see it in perspective, and we can confirm it, and being witnesses and mentors for this journey.
That's so great. I think that maybe now you can tell me a little bit more about what you mean about the inner marriage, because I see how that healing of the inner child really, at least in my perspective, I think that that's sort of the first line where we really need to get in and help that child feel safe and loved unconditionally. And then we start to get into growing up a little bit more and getting engaged in relationships and healing those relationships within, healing that inner marriage within, helps us with our relationships with the world, with our partners and co-workers and everyone else in our life. Is that how you see it also?
It is, and I have to say this this process is a process that I researched when I met for the first time my own inner child. And I realized there was so much abandonment and a feeling of not being held in warmth, and just this agonizing feeling of no one is really here for me. I can't even expect that they will come. And I was able to give that love that my inner child needed to myself. And I was able to visualize that transformation and bring in the essences onto that as well. And I started feeling the energy shift, even as a warmth to my heart center area. The real tangible change, I could really feel it. And so I experienced this transformation as being at the core of the work that I needed to do to transform my relationships. And that was major. But then I realized that there was something totally amiss about how the inner feminine related to the inner masculine. Something that was probably related to how the dynamics was between my parents and also ancestral patterns that came from other beings in my family and even past life patterns of my own. And I saw that I needed to reformat completely how the inner man was, how the inner female was, and how they were relating to each other. And I needed to totally transform that interaction into something that was healthy and whole, and that was a real encounter. Well, I found in the essences the perfect archetypal elements to help design this healthy matrix within. But it's been a process and a journey that I lived with very tangible and vivid results in my own life, and that I've watched changes happening in the lives of my own clients, and that now I even develop that into an offering that I describe in ways like I'm doing now. Yeah. So it is a whole process of changing that core matrix of how that child within feels in relation to deserving to be loved, to be received, to be appreciated, to be cherished, etc. And then this whole dynamic of how the inner couple relates internally.
So, in that offering, is there sort of a prescribed set of steps that you go through, or a certain linear process when working with a client to uncover those feminine and masculine aspects? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, there isn't a real step-by-step process because each story is different. And it really depends on what the person is bringing and what's happening. And usually, and that's, I think, the most important thing that I can say here, it's usually life experiences that actually help to uncover the wounding and make that wounding available for healing. And so it's usually a process in which we follow what's happening or what's not happening and how the person is responding to the triggers that happen in their lives that leads us through a process. So it's not so much that in this particular offering I have my own program that I take the person through. They bring their life issues, the alive issues that are really happening because life really brings the opportunities for the healing. Yeah.
Yeah, so if I'm hearing you, what I'm seeing is that when life experiences emerge in my day-to-day life, they can really be there to help show me and guide me in the direction for that next step of healing. So when you're working with a client and they're expressing to you what's up for them right now, what's happening in their life, it's an opportunity to heal on a deeper level. with each experience like that.
Exactly. And it's so frequent that people come to the session and say, but today I'm in a real bad day. And I say, great, because that means that the sore points are exposed and are showing to us exactly what's needed for the healing. And so this is the perfect day for us to have this session.
Somewhere I read that you incorporate some astrology into this offering, and I was hoping you could dive in a little bit to what you use and how it works its way in to this process.
I love that you asked that question, and that has become an even more significant piece of the work that I do. In this particular offering of the inner marriage, I've been using flower essence therapy as one of the basic elements of the work that actually guides us through the process, but I'm also using voice dialogue, and which is similar to internal family systems that some people know as well, working with inner parts. And because I've always used the astrological chart on the side in my work, as I look at the chart, I also understand so clearly the different parts of the psyche and the specific ways that they work for that specific person because of their elemental aspects and squares, conjunctions, aspects in their chart, and so on. And so it's so um, clear how it points us in the direction of the work that the person can do to process the healing.
And so that's Western astrology, a certain house system or methodology.
Western astrology. Yeah, it gives us amazing clues. Yeah. And it kind of gives us steps, almost like a map. And that's what the astrological chart is, really a map. So it becomes an added source of easy to grasp information that helps the person as they go along the steps of the journey. Let's say, for instance, someone who has a fire moon, for instance, and we're talking about the way they react emotionally. And I can show them the qualities of that moon in the sign of fire that has the impulsiveness, but that really wants to be appreciated and loved and totally deflates when they're not receiving that appreciation and that love. And then they get some clues on how they can deal with that through the understanding of their fiery moon, for instance.
And are there certain pieces of the chart that you look at more often, or are you maybe the first things to look at when you're, for example, working with a new client, that really speak to some of these themes with the inner child and masculine and feminine?
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. Yeah, of course, the luminaries, sun, moon, and ascendant, the position of the moon is so important when we're working with all these issues of the emotional matrix. And then, of course, when it comes to relationship, Mars and Venus and the dynamics and Mercury communication. So all the personal planets are very important. But the moon sign, the aspects to the moon position is of utmost importance.
Wow. I love hearing this. Do you work with the South Node at all, or the North Node as well, for sort of that evolutionary perspective?
Yeah, I actually do too. Yeah. And one of the things that I really love that I learned early on was to look at the rulers and how when you have like this whole hierarchy of rulerships in the chart and the elemental balance in the chart, the elements that people have in abundance and the lacking elements as well. That's such an important piece.
And isn't it interesting how what the essences can really bring in to enrich this is that there aren't any bad things. There's these polarities, and we're expressing this polarity in maybe a not a very healthy way. And being able to pair the client with an essence that will help to balance this out and bring out some of the assets and the great qualities underneath these compensation strategies that really aren't so healthy. Don't you think that that's just such an incredibly empowering part about the essence practice? You're able to help people overcome in a way that you couldn't just by showing them what the problem is.
Absolutely. And it is this possibility of allowing that spectrum to come alive and the choice to be available and the ability to own and embody the different aspects that stayed in the shadow. Yeah.
I'd love to talk a little bit more about this intermarriage piece of how you see, like you mentioned, the Mariposa lily being one of these archetypal essences for the inner child. What do you see as being an archetypal essence for the, say, the inner male or the inner female? Do you have ones that kind of pop up to the top?
Well, that's one of the fascinating aspects of this language of the flower essences and this array of archetypes. We actually have a whole collection of amazing essences for the feminine. The beautiful, receptive feminine lilies, for instance, that have that juicy quality and that come from these bulbs from within the soil that hold the moisture and the nurturing that the plant needs. And then the beautiful, receptive softness of those petals. And there's a whole collection of wild as well as some cultivated lilies that are absolutely fascinating as aspects of the feminine. And then we have other essences that bring forth different aspects of masculine qualities, of assertiveness, of the ability to be courageous and to face things, like, some of the essences for courage, like some of the mimulas, and also an essence like sunflower for really embodying our sun solar self, and just being able to be me and be aware of what I want and what I need, but also that solar shining presence and heart. And so there's a whole array.
And it's also, speaking in this language, it's also recognizing that, whether you have an uncomplicated relationship with your gender or not, there's all these facets of yourself that you can bring up and bring out and have in balance and harmony, rather than perhaps if you were repressed in who you felt that you should be. A lot of women in our culture have a lot of repression to their masculine side because it's not okay to be, whatever, too much, or show any anger or show any expression of what you're not happy about. And so these parts, these maybe more masculine parts get compressed and squished. And something like sunflower helps to bring that back up in a really healthy way, in a really healthy expression of that masculine, even though it has nothing to do with the gender of being male, right?
Yeah, there is that, but there's also some other aspects which are some that come to me a lot in my own practice, of women who have been part of the workforce, part of the corporate world, and that had to suppress their feminine so much, and that had to grow a very tough kind of masculine presence in the workplace, and who also had a lot of difficulty allowing the full expression of their receptive side to blossom. And so there's a lot of work that is done on that level as well. especially when these women have difficulty manifesting more fulfilling encounters and relationships, this work with the inner feminine becomes a very important piece, as well as a work of modulating that internal masculine that may have become kind of overpowering in some aspects and yet underdeveloped in other aspects as well. So each journey is different, and there are many different things that people bring to their balance and to that inner relationship between masculine and feminine.
Yeah, I can really attest to that scenario that you just outlined, having been in the corporate world for 3 decades myself. And what maybe some younger listeners might not realize is that for women to even have a seat at the table in a business setting in the 80s, the 70s, the 90s, basically up until now, and maybe even still now, you really had to sort of take on all the aspects of the masculine. And in that process, the feminine gets lost. We get afraid to have an emotion, basically, at the workplace. I mean, that is taboo. And so I spent probably my last 10 years deconstructing everything that I had built up during that time. So it's definitely a real thing, and it's not talked about a lot. So I love that you're bringing that up, and that you have clients that are finding you for this work. And then it's not a matter of just going back to the way you were before the work experience that changed you. It's a matter of taking those two pieces and integrating them for a more balanced whole.
Exactly, and allowing to nurture and cultivate and allow the blossoming of the parts that have become stifled and underdeveloped, or have grown without the possibility of the full spectrum of its expression. Yeah, and modulating the ones that have become exacerbated and overly present, and covering up other aspects. Yeah, it's a fascinating process, and I can't imagine taking people through this journey without the flower essences. I can't imagine, because the flower essences bring such a depth of insight and perception of the possibilities that I think, people who don't know this language are really missing out. And I really hope that this language can reach more and more professionals in different areas that help other people, so that they can incorporate that.
Absolutely.
And Ruth, is that part of, with your long history of educating in Brazil, did you see a lot of that being able to be integrated into other modalities, other practices, people who were therapists or people who were helping people on many other levels? That's kind of one of the most exciting things about essences, is you can integrate it with your other specialties and your other practices.
Absolutely. I love that you asked that question, because this is something that I've seen over the decades and I found fascinating. When we began organizing classes in Brazil, and ever since then, we've had psychologists, medical doctors, physical therapists, massage therapists, all kinds of body work, people working with family constellations. Nowadays, that's such a big thing there, and people bringing in the essences to that kind of work. And dentists, who use the essences, preparing the room and preparing the client to receive the treatment with the essences, etc. Just in the past 2 weeks, I received a client that's going now to be working with me, and she said, well, for many years, my psychologist, with whom I went and did a long-term therapy, she used the essences, and I know how much that helped me. Now I'm not with her in that therapy anymore. I finished that cycle, and I have another therapist who does not use the essences, but I can't do it without the essences, so I want you now to follow me through with my therapist on the side, So very often I work with people that are doing long-term work with other practitioners, and I do the essence part.
Yeah, so Ruth, when you're talking about that, it is really exciting to work with somebody who's working with a therapist or working on these sort of deeper, long-term transformational processes, because I know I've experienced that in my practice when somebody has been working with a therapist and you add in the essences and you bring that, that nature's healing in, how much more progress can be made and how much more can be healed on these deep, deep levels.
Yeah, and that's the thing that we see in Brazil. A lot of people working with the essences as part of, kind of a side support that they offer in their practices, and also sometimes referring their clients to flower essence practitioners if they are not willing to learn it themselves or use it themselves. Yeah.
I love hearing about the way that it's so well known in other countries. Not the United States, obviously, isn't there yet. So it's great to hear about this just complete acceptance from all of these professions that, these sort of established medical professions that are either using flower essences or referring to a flower essence practitioner. That sort of blows my mind.
Yeah, and then of course you have the other side of this. Then there might be, competition and some professional areas wanting to be the sole ones who can practice, and so there's all the political side that enters the scene, and so you have other problems come up. One of the big challenges we have with flower essences is we will love to always have them be free and accessible by everyone, and be this tool that is used complete in a way that's not regulated, just as Dr. Ba intended from the beginning. And I really hope that that can continue to be like that worldwide. And I'm afraid that, when you begin to have these regulatory bodies coming in and beginning to create norms and all of that, that can be a problem.
Ruth, when anybody who's listening to this just must be so inspired by hearing about your work. How do we get in touch with you? How do people get in contact and find out more about what you do?
Well, I'm very dedicated to, as much as I can, keeping my website up to date. And I have a website called essencementoring.com that does have a contact page where people can actually schedule a 30-minute free session to just get to know me and ask their questions and whatever. Yeah. So that's a good way.
And you have circles and for practitioners as well, right? Did you want to mention any of that?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've been offering is a monthly gathering that is free, in which people, often flower essence practitioners, gather to do an attunement with one plant every month, and that can be found in my website. And I'm also launching, and we're going to begin in January. I'm just about to send the information on this. I'm launching mentoring circles for next year. So those are going to be small groups of 8 people, either practitioners or students of flower essence therapy or practitioners of other modalities who also want to incorporate essences in their work. And that's an opportunity for people to ask their questions, discuss their cases, and talk about the development of their practices.
What a great offering. It's I know I've really been benefited by our friendship and being able to develop as a practitioner and helping with the flowers. There's so much more than you can learn out of books or just through that contact of working with an experienced practitioner is such a valuable asset. I know in my life and experience has been amazing to be able to work with you on a deep level like that.
Thank you. Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here with us today. It has been really wonderful to just kind of touch just the little surface of what you bring to your work and to this work of flower essence therapy. Thank you so much for being here with us and sharing with us.
Oh, you're so very welcome.
Yeah, I really appreciate your experience and knowledge on this subject, and really, look forward to following your work and keeping in touch, keeping the conversation going.
Me too. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to the Flower Essence Podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this sharing. And now that you're enjoying what you've listened to, who do you know that might want to hear about this? We would really appreciate if you would share that with them as well, because that's how these things spread, is person to person. If you can think of somebody who would benefit from this information, why don't you go ahead and share it? That would be a wonderful gift. And we'd love to hear from you. We really appreciate your feedback. We've been collating some feedback for some ideas for shows. And it's just been a really delight to bring this new element of having another practitioner talk with us about what she's really great at. And let us know what you think. Let us know on Facebook, on Instagram. We're active and we want to hear from you. So thank you for joining us today. It's been really a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye now. You've been listening to the Flower Essence Podcast with Urkana Feld and Kathleen Aspens, and we appreciate your interest in connecting with nature on a deeper level. You can find us online at thefloweressencepodcast.com or join us on Facebook and continue the discussion.
This podcast is meant for educational and entertainment purposes only. We are not physicians and do not diagnose, prescribe, or treat medical conditions. Please consult with your own physician or healthcare practitioner regarding the suggestions and recommendations made by the hosts and guests of the Flower Essence Podcast.